There's a lot in that. Any
Like
thoughts on that?
always. How do you hate your friends? How do we do that?
Well,
We have to hate each
well,
other's guts, Max.
well, 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 this is exactly what we've been talking about in regards to Girard and in regards to Plato. I mean, we had that discussion about Nietzsche hating Plato, and I was saying his hatred is actually a form of love. He's he's trying to. I mean, this is the bind when you get in the Girardian aspect, where you have your master, your teacher, and at the very start you're the student, so there's a big distance between you and your teacher. But over time, distance becomes shortened because your skill level increases, and eventually you become rivals. And I think that Nietzsche, in some way, is sort of tapping into this Girardian aspect. If you just agree with your teacher, I mean, what is that? It doesn't really, not really innovative in any way.
Yeah, wait, do you what do you mean by that? That you're not innovating by disagreeing with your teacher?
No, I mean, if you're just there, sort of imitating everything that your teacher does and saying yes, master, you're not being your own person.
Yeah, that's why Zarathustra goes off and wants to be alone, right? It seems like he
Yes.
is kind of. It's like it's not enough to be a leader and of all these followers. Like
Yeah.
they just they keep identifying with me, and I don't want that.
No, but what he wants is he wants them to find themselves. He doesn't want carving
Right,
copies of them.
right.
He wants them to build their own house and then challenge him. And only when you can get into that, I mean, you know this yourself. When you have somebody who takes an opposite position to you and that argues it with full force, you have to be on your A game. There's a dynamic that emerges with that.
Yeah, 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 and that's what fucking comes up with this thing that he says. Like I recently put it in this Discord that you have to be able to admit that you're wrong even when you're right, especially when you're right, because otherwise you get caught up in those ego games, and then
Yes.
it doesn't have any spiritual richness to it. You're just like it's. I feel like when that happens, that means that you're mediated by something that's beyond your control. Like whoever comes to you, you're just gonna be like, oh, I have to convince them that I'm right because I'm so, because I
Yes.
feel that I'm right so much.
But but
And if
but,
you
but
can distance yourself from that.
you also there's types of hatred. Like you can hate somebody you really like and get on with because they're so good. Up Dimitri, you won the last thing. Fucking hate that bastard. But it's a loving hatred. It's a different. It's a different. It's not like a sort of genocidal hatred. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think
It's a
he.
playful hatred.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's it. I think that for me, then like that's like why you have to hate your friend is because if you open up this dimension in your friendship, then you
Yeah.
can actually utilize like those dogs barking, the dogs of envy. You can utilize it and strive for the virtue in that way. Whereas if you don't have friends which you can do that with, then it's gonna explode in some unconscious way in another form. I think that's what it's about in this sense.
There was on that question of friendship, like in that passage today for me, the sentence that stood out was, may your compassion for the friend conceal itself under a hard shell. You shall lose a tooth fighting on it. Thus will it have its subtlety and sweetness. So I'm not sure that I think, then going back to what Dimitri said at the start of this thing about like that that distance concept with the neighbor, right? Of like, it seems to me when he's talking about relationships, really what he's trying to do is set up, like you could think of it structurally, like he wants the individual to maintain a distance from the other person. And so maybe there is a place for, some aspect of hatred, but there's always like a double thing going on. Like in this case, it's not that he's saying don't be compassionate towards your friend. He's saying you have your compassion, but in some ways maybe it needs to be concealed.
Yeah, because you can lie with compassion. All this sweet, huffy, fluffy stuff that it's always great and always nice, like, that's horrible. And it's not honest. It just covers over the conflict and the lack and the aggression at the heart. Yeah, I think something that comes up for me with hatred is that, and I think I don't know if it was Max or you, Brendan, that you both talked about Plato, and like Nietzsche doesn't it's like the most hateful hate of Plato in some sense would be to not even talk about Plato. Like if Nietzsche actually thought Plato was horrible and useless and he has no value, then he wouldn't talk about him. But there is something of value there. That's why he talks about it. It's just like in your personal life. If you hate someone and you fight it out, then you're at a way better place than if you hate someone and they hate you and you don't even talk. Like that's the worst dimension, where you don't even allow the dialectic in the interpersonal dialectic to take place, and you just merely distance each other from each other and don't even recognize each other as humans, basically.
Yeah, one little other addition to that is that I think if you don't do what he says there and kind of keep some of your compassion concealed, then what you do is you totally kind of experience pity and emotion together. So you totally collapse the distance between you, and so now you're just a we, not just a we, but the I is not so much active if you're totally going over to the other person's feeling.
So what do you think about Nietzsche and pity? Because I know I haven't encountered it yet, I don't think, here in Zarathustra, but he's very critical of pittiness. Doesn't really seem to have mercy for it.
But he talked about the sick. He talked about where did he talk about it?
Because what I've read in the past is that Nietzsche says about pittiness that it seems like he thinks it's kind of fake. Because if I pity you, then I feel bad for you, but what did you get out of it? You're giving someone your lack when they are lacking already.
It's slightly repetitive, but again, I think around pity, a central thing to be attached to that is this idea of like distance and the collapsing of boundaries. Like pity is an emotion that collapses in some ways, like the difference between your emotion and someone else's. Like we're both going to feel the same way together because I'm going to come over and empathize with you. You feel excited, therefore I also feel excited. Like it has this boundary collapsing quality.
He is a woman's emotion.
Okay, Garrett, can you explain that?
They always come back at you like, oh, you don't feel pity, you can't step into other people's shoes. It's an immediate reaction I oftentimes get whenever I talk to women about pity, and how whenever I say I try to distance myself from pity, because what good does it do for me to actually just step into there? Like for me, I think it's this fantasy as well that I think it's also this mythical fantasy that you can sit there and you can sort of put yourself in someone else's shoes. I don't know. I find that contemptible.
Yeah, I think about pity now that you say this. I think the pity is like the spirit of heaviness, Like you have a certain heaviness, therefore I also have to take upon me this kind of heaviness. Whereas, okay, so what if we all just do that? Then we just end up in this downward spiral of heaviness and looking down at our feet. And
It's such a. It's like It's like whenever like whenever leftists talk about pity all the time, and that's like their greatest spiritual tool to gain following, is their ability to create this pity. To create pity is the emotion of victims. Pity is the attachment to victimhood.
What is the difference, do you think, Garrett, is the difference between pity and perspectival?
Well, just merely having a perspective, like I can have the perspective of, say, a homeless person. You could bring up the perspective of a homeless person, but that doesn't mean that you actually have to take on the weight of their suffering. You know, this is a very. I think that's also a very. I don't think pity is even Christian either, because like Jesus, he just dies, right? He dies so that the weight of sin is taken away from man. So man shouldn't have to pity. They should just pray to God through him in order to alleviate this pity.
So I just think that there's something more here, because if you read the genealogy by Nietzsche, he knows about slave morality so well, or even in Zarathustra, he knows his enemies so well. But the only way for him to know all of this is that he has been inside them, that he has taken their perspective and actually settled himself with their resentment. He tasted their food, he smelt what they smelt like, he slept in their bed, he wore their clothes. But I wouldn't say that Nietzsche is pity himself. There seems to be something extra that pity does. The pity, well, what does pity do? Because Nietzsche does all of this, but I don't think he's a philosopher of pity. He's against pity.
yeah, I think it's really the form of catharsis. That's how I see it.
Right. Yes.
Well, something I always separate in my own life is the difference between compassion and empathy. So whereas compassion, I associate that more with this kind of naive, I'm so compassionate for you, and we all have such love for each other and mankind. Whereas the way I look at empathy is more as this kind of emotional and social intelligence that can feel into, tap into the other, but doesn't have to identify with it, but can actually somewhat logically mediate it to give whatever you have to that other if he needs it or if they need it, if that makes sense. So I think that's Nietzsche definitely was a highly empathetic person.
But what this is, because this is something that has been playing on my mind a lot. If you're going to be a philosopher, yeah, if you're going to be a philosopher, this perspectival aspect, or this willingness to go through dialectics, is so important. And what is it in this catharsis that makes one philosopher be able to deal with it in a better way than? I mean, it is sort of like a taste. I mean, I can taste it, I can see it, I know, I feel like I have a good sense of it. It's sort of disgusting. It's hard to pin down.
I think the only real way to deal with the suffering of the world is actually to distance yourself to it. by being too close to everything, you actually, I think Nietzsche actually, when he talks about at the end, distance yourself from me. I think distance is really important for Nietzsche, and I think he would say about pity being too close to say the suffering of someone else is sort of a false. Is sort of false because everyone's weight is their own. You can't really lift someone else's weight for them, and if you were to lift someone else's weight for them, you would stunt them and keep them from actually overcoming. So I think it's that pity is actually a dangerous way of viewing people.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think that where he started with the market of the flies, he repeatedly says, what was it in English? Don't be a fly swatter. Don't be a fly swat. Don't be the guy who just goes and taps on flies all the day because there's so many fucking flies. Anyway, just get out of there. Just get out of where all the flies are, eating the shit.
Yeah.
So you have to choose the right battles, and that's perhaps we can look at it in a way that Zarathustra in the book is trying to find the best enemy to fight his best battles with.
Yeah, like Nietzsche is not trying to sell you something, he's not Andrew Tate who's telling you, yeah, I give me $50 a month and I'll sell you a way out of your own pity for yourself. Beware the priests of the market, beware the priests of the state. And I think priests of both state and market are both trying to sell you into their power vacuum to deal with pity and shame.
Okay, no, because this is very interesting, because at the moment I'm trying to develop my own method of searching for the truth, and this big perspectival aspect of Nietzsche. There's a willingness to go to places where I haven't been gone before. There's a dialectical aspect in Hegel where you're literally breaking down how your mind thinks. And, as I said with the genealogy, it seems that Nietzsche does this tightrope aspect where on the one side he is so close and in there, but then at the same time he has this distance. I think you're just raising some good points.
I think that's such a delicate point you're making there. The way I would put it is like you're being in it, but you're also being out of it. And I think that's really touching the dimension of absolute knowing, that, like Cadell would say, like you're in the phenomenal drama, but somehow you're also out of it. And when you're there, then you can separate being right from having the other to be convinced of your being right. Because when you're merely in it, you're just in the game, and then you can't really separate your essence in that sense from that.
Yeah, because go on, Garrett.
Oh, I didn't say anything. Continue.
Yeah, I think you're on the exactly what I'm trying to say, because I have two images of two philosophers that both do this deeply perspectival dialectic, going into the other. But one philosopher does it differently to the pity philosopher. But I'm not at the stage yet to know what the difference is. I just think there's something more degrading or sick in the pity. The pity philosopher sort of revels in being the savior, The you have this meme of the white savior going around. Maybe maybe that the person uses pity in some subconscious way as a will to power.
Yes.
The philosopher of absolute knowing uses it, is sort of trying to be as aware as possible to use it as just exploration, and not even to use it in any way, just
to be with it. Just to be with it.
To be perspectival to a will to truth.
Yeah. That's great, man. That really touches something also that I really want to mention, and that is that there's a contradiction I found in Zarathustra, and that is that, so in the part on reading and writing, Nietzsche is getting very high on his own spirit, and he starts talking about how you're walking. First he starts saying, you have to write in your blood, and then he talks about walking, then running, then about flying, and he's flying up into the clouds and looking down on everyone, and like laughing about the suffering and laughing about the joy. And then when we get about to the point with marriage, suddenly he says, don't laugh. He literally has this imperative of like, don't laugh about children who are suffering on their parents because who are crying on their parents because they're right to do so. So that's just a massive contradiction, because you just said that you were laughing about everything. So how do we explain that? And obviously Nietzsche was a genius, so we can't just say, oh yeah, he was sloppy, he didn't have a look at that, and he just looked over it. I don't think that's the correct reading. I think that the correct reading is actually what you just put forth, is that when something like that comes up, this kind of spirit of heaviness, it's not that we just negate, to put it in a Hegelian way, it's not that you just abstractly negate the spirit of heaviness and distance yourself from it, but you're with it for the moment, and then you're with it for the moment with this will to truth, and then you pass on to another moment, and then it all continues.
I think that also the pity philosopher is sort of like a virtue signaler. Is using this to say, oh look, I'm anti-virtuous. But the person who's a will to truth is being perspectival for truth. You have to be perspectival. You have to be willing to go wherever you're going to go if you're a philosopher of the truth.
But the question here is then, how do you? Because Nietzsche, his last project was going to be this huge book about rewriting the history of Western philosophy and philosophy as a whole, I guess, and write about how fundamental the will to power is and everything. He never finished the project, obviously, but he didn't call it the will to truth. So how do you see that?
So say that question one more time, Dimitri.
Well, another way to put the question is that I think that for Nietzsche, the will to power would be even more fundamental to the will to truth, because the will to truth, if you, nobody's gonna say, no philosopher you're going to is gonna say, I don't have a will to truth. Well, obviously Kant would say, we have to dare to know, we have to dare to know the truth, and then Hegel comes along and he says that, Kant was his biggest error was being afraid of making errors, so he didn't go all the way like he should have, in a sense.
Yeah. I think that
this is where psychoanalysis sort of rears its ugly head.
I mean, I think a simple way to look at that is just that, and I think he says that in the Will to Power notebook, in a lot of places, but that the will to truth would be like a subset of the will to power. It's like a particular type of power pursuit.
Yeah, I think that Foucault, first of all, I think reflection is the key. I mean, this is what I was saying in my method, that the philosopher of pity isn't really reflecting on their own. They're not being vulnerable and transparent as to their own desires and their own drives and what they're doing. They aren't putting themselves under the microscope to say at the same time. They are using the pity in order to be seen as good. But the philosopher who has the will to truth, is much more reflexive. And I think that what Foucault is doing is saying, look, we're producing all of this knowledge here. We're creating identities through knowledge production. And I mean, it's just sort of naive to say that there is no relationship between power, knowledge, and truth. But we shouldn't moralize it. I mean, it's just part of the truth, is it not?
What is
where does the power? Where does power stop? Or where does, like, I mean, the government, creates Trinity College, funds it, gives it all of the money to it. I mean, where does power stop, truth begin, and knowledge? It's all. The last point is that in the beginning of Zarathustra, Nietzsche is saying that with God dead and the Platonism that goes with it, this idea of a purity thesis, good is gone. So how do we orientate ourselves now? How do you self-transform if the purity thesis is gone, if everything is intermixed?
I'd like to speak on this. I think the return of the sacred, which means the return of secrecy, in that if you can have enclosed spaces where truth is just allowed to be openly discussed, whereas in a university sense, everything is sort of surveilled and kept close ties on.
Yeah.
Max? Yeah, that's Tantra. That's Tantra, right, Garrett? That's perhaps such a thing we are missing with Nietzsche, but this thing about
why is it Tantra?
Because how is it Tantra? Well, Tantra happens.
Allow anyone to walk into a tantric space.
Yeah.
There's a gate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's the need for a boundary.
Yeah, because in the tantric realm is craziness. It's psychedelics. It's crazy sex stuff. It's I mean that's it. So many people are just not ready for it.
There's a sort of truth to Islam, I think, the way that they cover up women as a sort of gatekeeping device to the otherworldliness of woman. And I think what a return to truth in regards to Nietzsche as a return to the mythic realm, which is the return to the truth of the woman, and what does woman desire, or what is what is this realm, this sort of mythos? What does it tell? What does it say?
Yeah, that's Garrett. That's a genius point about Islam. That Islam, to word it in another sense, it has a implicit understanding of the tantric nature of woman. So it has this very heavy barred absolute that it puts in front. So Nietzsche in Beyond Good and Evil, of course, he starts out critiquing philosophers, saying truth is a woman, that's why all these philosophers don't understand it. And that's, if we link that with Tantra, then that's Tantra is that's where the truth happens in that sense. In this Hegelian sense, where it's you encountering your own otherness. And once you're in that tantric realm and you do encounter your own otherness, of course you have to be able to make the step that the dialectical step that it comes to you as otherness, but then you have to negate or sublate it and own up to the fact that it is yourself. You have to recognize yourself as that otherness.
I just wanted to circle back slightly to where you guys are talking about Nietzsche being like against pity. I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I also think if you thought of pity like an atmosphere or something, and then he's maybe trying to cultivate a boundary within that and like pull compassion out of pity. I think that there's a way that he's not so just simplistically like against anything really. I think he's often like a gardener. He's trying to say, okay, we've got this garden called pity, or it's not a garden yet, but if we treated it like a garden, if you use some concealed methods, then you could have compassion. Compassion needs to operate with a little bit of secrecy towards the friend or things like that. I think really the boundary is so important when with pity, where if it doesn't have boundaries, like pity, emotion, it like overflows boundaries and knocks them over. And I think what he's trying to say is we shouldn't knock over all those boundaries all the time, and in fact we should probably build some of them up, not because like the ground is wrong, but in order to be cultivated you have to add boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Nietzsche is really aware of the fact that I was just talking with one of the people in this course, and he was saying that all his life he's been working at this bank, and just now in his 40s he's getting into philosophy, and he notices that whenever he meets people of what he himself called his previous life, is that just his presence, just his body triggers them. It's just the fact that he's there and that he has overcome himself and like been so brave to like relinquish his whole identity that he's been built up through the years, that's already triggering to people. You don't even have to say anything, and that's what he says in The Market of the Flies too. I don't know the exact sentences anymore, but yeah, you're just gonna massively trigger people if you think you can just be honest all the time and be sharply philosophical.
Well, this feeds into the question that I put in today into the Nietzsche chat, is why does human have to do this to himself? I mean, why is everything smoke and mirrors? Why can't we just be more honest? What prevents this from being?
I think, what's the most honest things we have in our body? That's the greatest intelligence that performs the I. It's the primal drives, right? It's the killing drive, the fucking drive, the eating drive. Well, to be most honest with that would be to let them loose. We can't do that. We have to repress ourselves.
Psychoanalysis. Ugly.
I would say you could like flip your question, almost invert it, like about the human thing, and say maybe more like, it's not that we can't be truthful, it's that we're the only species that we know of that is able to be truthful. So it's like that's where this like care happens, because it's like that this then desire to live truthfully, that's so much different from any other species that's like maybe from our perspective is living its truth in some sense, but it's not thinking about that.
Well, is it really that we desire truth, or what comes up for me in this book is that it's not that like we want the ultimate truth, is that we want our downfall. It doesn't matter on what level of human, of what level of spiritual development you're looking at, whether it's the lowest or the highest, whether it's like the death drive where you're just like addicted to drugs and intoxicating yourself all the time, or whether you're like one of the highest men trying to self-overcome himself towards the overman. Like, we desire our own downfall because we have this deep contempt for ourselves.
I think you could say it pretty generally, saying that like if we're conscious, what we're doing with that is like we have this desire to adjust something, like to take control of our. We feel there's some lack in our current condition, and we want to go towards something, not necessarily truth, but that fact makes you like attempt to meddle with your current state.
I'm now that I think of it, I'm actually really skeptical of this idea that I think that's something I get of Nietzsche as well. That like you can't really depend on striving to like impersonal ideas and like or reifications in that sense, because it's like it conceals something more fundamental.
All right, let's go back to the text. We started with of the flies of the marketplace. Let's just take the first three that we read. So, flies of the marketplace, of chastity, and of friends. Is there anything in these three that stood out to you guys? Because the truth penetrates its only sensitive leaders. Right? Oh yeah, and blood is to him the best of all arguments. A truth that penetrates only sensitive ears he calls a lie, and the thing of nothing. Truly he believes only in gods who make great noise in the world. The marketplace is full of solemn buffoons, and the people boast of their great men. These are their heroes of the hour, but the hour oppresses them, so they press you. And from you two they require a yes or no, and woe to you if you want to set your chair between the for and against. Do not be jealous, lover of truth, because of these inflexible and oppressive men. Truth has never yet clung to the arm of an inflexible man.
Yeah, I think for me that whole section's kind of like pointing out how there's no space for nuance in the marketplace. No. And I think it's a nuance emphasis there. The importance of nuance that gets lost.
Yeah, to continue on the point of Brandon, he says about the friend that can you be close to your friend without walking to his side? In other words, can you, like, how far can your intimacy in friendship go without it falling into like a follower-leader relationship? Like, can you hold the oscillation? Can you hold the difference? Can you hold the asymmetry between both of you into the depths, into the deepest depths, where they become more traumatic, of course, more sharp, more perhaps potentially destructive of your identity?
Yeah, I think that idea of like the two always need a third to prevent it from seeping into the depths. I think again, it's like this thing of like you can get really intimate with someone, but if it's gonna still be intimacy, then there still has to be some kind of difference between the two of you. Like there still has to be two involved, and not collapse that into just like a one. Like I think in that sense, that's one way I always think about that. A little bit maybe overly math-like, but
when I think about like the market, is the market always has to hold value, some sort of value. Like for the marketplace, A equals A, always. And to sort of put A equals B into the mix in regards to the market is to sort of undermine the entire premise of the market. That there is no real oscillation, that A always has to equal A to those in the marketplace.
And is this because he talks about vengeance and hatred so much in the marketplace, and the suspicion, the sinfulness? To your neighbour will all be poisonous flies.
Yeah, I think Garrett is right. It's Guion wrote a lot, René Guion, about the quantification that happens in the market. Which is what, if you use the A equals A formula, what that allows you to do is to quantify variables. I guess once you do this, is that you already have this like objective reification, like the reification of objects that are circulating, and like that self-externalization of spirit in objects, I would say, kind of reduces the depths, the possibility of expression of the depths.
He's talking about the marketplace as basically they want blood from all you in all innocence. He's talking about them as if they're sort of flesh-eating zombies or great men. They thirst for it.
I mean, I think there's a thought experiment you can kind of do with the marketplace part, where then if you take any of like the most beautiful ideas you can think of from Nietzsche, like the eternal recurrence or whatever, like, and then you try to imagine that happening in a marketplace. Like, I think that really calls, like, it casts this big distinction between, like, I can't have that nuanced conversation about this thing that's going to get turned into that A equals A. You can't talk about, like, a nuanced point about what does an equal sign mean in a marketplace. Like, you can't, because that's one of his really interesting areas of his nuanced thought is like that, about similarity and difference, and how one of like the primary things the mind does, like one of the first things it does, is make comparison. And so it's like, it's very nuanced, where it's like, can you even say that because you're looking at two chairs, they're both chairs? Are those both chairs? They're similar. What does it mean to say something similar? Like, that is not a discussion you can have in a market.
It's a homogenizing. The marketplace is like a homogenizing tool. That is basically it's like a tool for small men to use to gain the power of the superfluous. That's what I would say is like, I think it's relevant to bring up everyone's favorite person, Andrew Tate, in relevance to this, because isn't this guy just seriously the greatest priest of the market? He has tapped into the minds of every superfluous 13, 14-year-old and has put it in their head that he can sell them his own success. Yeah, all this sort of A equals A. Yeah.
I think he has also tapped into their revenge and resentment against feminism too.
Yeah, but it's through this false priesthood of consumerism. At the end of the day, he's just another high-level superfluous person. At the end of the day, he has all this stuff, but he's still, all he does is just consume high-grade products, and that's it. There's no real will to power there, except the will to, I guess, drive more cool cars. To me, that's just the most pointless existence possible.
It's just like fast food. It's just give me more. There's no...
It's pure quantity.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Buenon is talking about. It's pure quantity for quantity's sake. But there's also in the Flies of the Marketplace, if you read philosophy, it's sort of like the history of heretics, the history of persecution. I mean, Socrates, Descartes, all of these guys were great. And they're all persecuted by the masses.
The most hated is the flying one, he says on The Way of the Creator. And creating is to love because one because one contempts. And you cannot know love when you don't know contempt.
I've been thinking about this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been thinking about the difference between resentment and contempt. And what I've noticed is I've contempt for hip-hop, right? I love hip-hop from as a young age. I loved hip-hop. But just looking at so much of the rappers now, it's just a load of bollocks. I mean, rapping about bullshit, and I have contempt for them because they could be so much more. I'm not resentful. I feel bigger than. If I was resentful, I'd feel smaller.
Some bars.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, he says here, go into loneliness with your love and with your creating, brother, and only after that will justice follow after you. I'm translating right now from the Dutch translation. I think this is so awesome. This is like so Hegelian, because it's Hegelian, but he comes with some kind of guarantee that. Well, he says, go into loneliness with your love and your creating, and then justice will come after. So what does that mean? I mean, I think for Hegel, yes, go into your loneliness with your love and your creating, but there's no guarantee of justice coming at the end, or maybe the justice that will come at the end is the justice that had to come at the end.
Yes.
Regardless of what that justice is, maybe it's death, whatever.
And it's not in any way a consequentialist view. If I do X or something, this is a pure sort of creativity and exactly what the noble justice would have done in the genealogy. I'm debating. We'll see what happens. It's a virtue ethics. You should do something because it is good, irrespective of the consequences. It's ancient morality or ancient ethics.
Max, what do you think about this point about women? So the man must be brought up for war, and the woman for the relaxation of the warrior. All the other stuff is just stupidity.
This is in chastity.
No, this is in about older and younger women.
Yes. Yeah. That makes some people. I love this. You could just put this in university.
Yeah.
Just start buying. Yeah, I mean, there is something deeply traditional about this, and I also think true. I mean, what do you want to say? I mean,
yeah, it is traditional. So I mean, we can unpack this. The men must be made up for war, and the woman for the relaxation of the warrior. He does. So you could say are women, Max? Are women not fit for war? Is that what he's saying?
Well, yes, I think so. Yes, I think so. Yes.
But then if we can come back with the Nietzschean feminism, we can say that. But wait, Max. At the end of this paragraph, he says, "Strange is it, Zarathustra does not know much about women, and he still is right when he talks about them. Is that because there's nothing impossible with women? Nothing is impossible with women. Thus spoke Zarathustra." Isn't this this is for me so incredible? I just had this conversation today with someone about Nietzsche and Lacan and women, and I was telling them, Nietzsche says woman is truth, and then they were like, yeah, but you're saying it in such a generalizing way, and this and that, and it seems to me that Nietzsche wants to be punchy, he wants to be sharp. He doesn't say, oh, femininity, perhaps we could hypothesize is potentially more like this, and masculinity is more like this. No, he says woman is this. But then at the end, we are sure that he kind of has this understanding that there doesn't exist monolith of there is no woman. The woman doesn't exist, because he says that no, there's nothing impossible with woman. So he knows that even though that you can make universal statements about woman from the standpoint of phallic masculine kind of framework, which is like highly traditional, still he knows that there's this contingency that always slips away, and there's always cases where you could posit, hey, but this is not true in all cases, you're generalizing.
You can be aware of the exception, but you can't make it the rule.
Yeah. Very well said. Very well said.
Yes.
You have to make the rule, and then you have to be aware of the exception. But when society starts making rules out of exceptions, that's when everything goes crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you see this in some of the talks that some of the girls have with Andrew Tate. Like, the women just, a lot of the women love him. I mean, exactly, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I wouldn't agree with everything on him, but the woman wants to be. She wants to go out with a capable man. She doesn't want to go out with some. Which is also very interesting here, because Nietzsche does say man is a child, but there's a different grade in child. I mean, we all know. It's like child has to become man, but some children nowadays don't become man.
Some even use transgenderism to like prevent becoming men. I honestly think this. Like, I mean, I'm a huge supporter of queer and all of it, and like the city in Amsterdam, it's fucking crazy. Like everywhere is queer flags and queer people, and like it's basically a gigantic orgy. But like, there's like trans people where, you know, like there's these internet subcultures where they are like obsessed with like plushies and like cartoons and like this kind of stuff, and they're very afraid of sexual difference, and they're very prudish. And I think that honestly these so-called trans people, they just don't want to grow up. But I do believe in trans. Like, I do think that, you know, you can be trans and have this thing, but I really think there's a difference between that and just this resistance to growing up.
Camille Paglia is definitely a trans person. Like, she's like a masculine, feminine archetype.
Yeah,
she's excellent.
But she's a full-grown. But she's like a fully developed person. And the sort of trans phenomena is like a retardation of your ability to grow up, and fully assume either a masculine or a feminine archetype. I wouldn't say it's like false to say that men and women can pick up masculine or feminine archetypes. It's whether or not you fully go into that archetype, whereas these young people who get into the trans scene, they just want to stay as confused as possible in order to actually not go into the great pain and the great suffering that it is to actually pick up an identity. And they want their identity to be, at the end of the day, nothing, and it's the ultimate superfluity.
But what I find interesting is that there is a sense of transition somehow. So the identity is masculine, but they are going somewhere, albeit, you know, we can say it's sort of messy or confused or whatever, but there is a sense of I'm a femme or I'm a masculine. You know, you see this. There's in some of the trans, there's a clear sense that they are going to a feminine, or a clear sense that you can still see the feminine traits in them. They will grow their hair. So in a sense, they're still not getting out of the masculine and feminine drives.
Oh no, no, that's all there is.
To use Camille Paglia as an example, right? It's not. You can't say at a certain age, "Oh yeah, I'm trans." It's a self movement of spirit that shows itself throughout life. Like Camille Paglia talked about how, as a young girl, she liked dressing up as masculine archetypes for Halloween, and she didn't have this need to. There wasn't this need to identify. Maybe it's just because of her time that she lived in, but also, I think it's telling that, it wasn't like, oh, I am this trans person, right? I am this trans identity.
Indeed.
It was just she was a girl, right? And then she grew over time into this masculine archetype. There wasn't this need to just identify with the thing itself. It was
just natural.
For me, the way that it works is like a natural. It's just process. Is all it is.
Garrett, have you ever gone to a woman and forgotten your whip?
Never. When I learned to bring my whip, I never forgot it.
Okay.
So, don't forget what you're going to say, Dimitri. But what do you think of the chastity section? I mean, this, and just look at these men. Their eyes reveal that they know nothing better on earth to lie with a woman. This is very related to what you're doing, Dimitri.
Yeah. I felt I felt personally attacked, for sure. Something I've been trying to think is, I feel like in the tantric realm, one of the easier things for me that it was to step over is shame. And for example, jealousy is like very hard for me, but shame is not. You can step over it and go through it. So Nietzsche, of course, talks a lot about shame, and I would like to write something about that. But chastity, I don't know. I'd have to reread it. So what I wanted to say is in the chapter of about child and marriage, he says, he's talking about the different archetypes of men getting together with a woman on a very superficial basis, which doesn't strive to the overman. He says, and another looked for a virgin with virtues of an angel, but at the moment he became the service girl of a woman, and now he also had to become an angel for her. And I thought that was, it's so true, and it's so funny, and it's so sad, and it's hilarious.
What's your analysis of it?
Well, it's, so you imagine this man who, he just wants the sweetest little girl. Why? Because this girl won't resist him. This girl won't be bitter with him. She will just be sweet and small and cute. He looks for this because this kind of, like, I guess, he doesn't want this woman to have like the masculine energy to like compete with him in any sense. But that's why he will turn into this girl himself, because he loves this girl within himself. And like Nietzsche says, what does he say? Even the sweetest woman is bitter. I'm not. Let me see. Yeah, bitter is even the sweetest woman. He literally says this in the chapter on women. Yeah, so it's interesting, these dynamics of projection. Like basically that if you, if you're looking for this sweetness, that you will turn into it because you are forced.
It's interesting to see that Nietzsche isn't above, it's not necessarily a morality, but he's not above, clearly defining like a sexual, like the role that sex has in your spiritual life. Like he warns against against going into chastity if it's difficult, because it will fill you with lust and filth instead of actually doing what it's supposed to do, which is actually to find that sort of purity in just being good with oneself. But it's interesting that he but it's like a reversed. It's a reversed. It's not a Christian sexual morality. Really, it's not really even a morality.
Yes.
It's just saying to beware a certain behaviors inside of yourself, and if you're this way, maybe you want to go a different way with things.
I think he says even the best love is an ecstatic similarity and a painful fire. It's a torch, which you must have to light to higher ways. So, I mean, yesterday I was reading this, and I was just in the city and talking with this girl, and then I got her number, and then I was reading this, and I was like, wow, like, why? I have to not talk to her because I just read this and I was like, wait, why do I chase this kind of stuff, Because I talked to her and I knew, like, okay, she's not like that interesting to me, like she's sexually attractive, sure, but yeah. I guess I really take this stuff very personal when he says, like, you have to use your best love, you have to use those drives to light the fire to higher ways. And if you're just gonna fuck around and, fuck all these women, then why? Why do you want to do that?
Well, this is what we had this debate a while ago, Dimitri, about why I was pushing you in regards to Plato. I was taking up the Socratic and the Platonic. Why do Tantra? Why do philosophy? And you were saying actualize your spirit, and I was saying why do that? And I do think that Tantra. I do think you're doing Tantra first of all because you're young. You're 22. That's what you do when you're young. You just want to. Energy. You want to do it, right? So that's natural. But I mean, it's very interesting if you look at the Republic. At the very start of the Republic, Socrates is talking to one of the guys, and he was like, "This beast. I'm old now. And finally, this beast has left me." And he was talking about the sexual drive as a beast. And we were talking earlier in this conversation about how, why do humans deny themselves? And you were saying, well, if you let it open, it would just be chaotic. So, we've been talking about truth. And if you look at Heidegger, if you look at Nietzsche, if you look at Plato, if you look at Hegel, truth is a journey. It's not just this sort of correspondence. It's a journey to break your own consciousness, to see the world from different perspectives, and to, in a sense, from a Girardian perspective, to be an ontology, to be a being, to be mimicked, and to make alien things non-alien, that are incorporated, and to go out of the cave. So I would say you're doing it to know yourself, to have self-knowledge, and to get closer to the good, which of course is more Platonic, but I think we can have a Platonic good, but it's how you relate to that good. You can go down, instead of with the Christian, or how Plato has been sort of analysed previously, where we just sort of immediately look up. Nietzsche is saying, no, we can actually look down and go through ourselves, go through Tantra, go through our body, in order to be closer to truth and a form of good. So retention of Platonist, Platonic good and form, but our relationship to it is in a new way.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't use the word good here because I think it's like like moral. But I think you're fundamentally right at what you're getting at.
Something just like came up as I was going through chastity again here, and Nietzsche talks about it is better to fall into the hands of a murderer than into the dream of lust. And isn't this so true that, like, I think Nietzsche would say that it's bad to fall into a relationship with a lustful woman, because a lustful woman is going being with a lustful woman is going to keep her greatest love, which is her greatest gift. It's going to be held back from you.
In what way? How do you see the gift being held back?
Because if her in I forget where it is, but in a different chapter, Nietzsche says woman's greatest gift is her love. And I think somewhere else he also states that like woman fuck, I forget what his other point was, but something along the lines of woman is in and of herself. Like man is outside of himself. He has to constantly overcome and be outside. Like he has to be in himself and outside of himself simultaneously in this way. Whereas woman is purely within this, I guess, within the species is how I would put it. Which means that when she is lustful, she's sort of looking outwards and praying with her eyes, rather than being with herself and allowing herself to be taken. Then she can love to the fullest. I would say, think of the difference between the female archetypes of, say, you have the sort of the chaste young damsel in a forest who's just sitting there with herself, versus a sort of the village woman who spies on strangers and foreigners who comes into the village in order to like take advantage of them or lure them into her lust.
Yeah,
I would say that
it's a being for others. It's
Nietzsche thinks that the latter is contemptible because it's a sort of prying. It's a calculating coldness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a being for others rather than a being.
Rather than a being in and of itself, yes.
Do that, Dimitri. Can you just go back to before you broke up? What were you saying about the good in Plato and the points that I made in regards to Tantra? but in the I think I'm going to meditate on everything you said there because I think you said some very interesting things. But I mean, in relation to the why question um, that we've been talking about here, that Nietzsche Tantra is still not, in a sense, going against a Platonic good. No, I want to talk about Plato, not Platonism. Plato. Yes. Okay, we we can come back to that anyway. I'll bring you over to the dark side someday. So, do you have any? Do you have any? Sorry, the light side. Sorry, I should speak properly. Do you have any? What were you going to raise? What were your thoughts? I tell you two things with this. Um, I think it was Bap who said this. Or it was some other artist. He said every single artist has a right to kill himself. So, when I am sort of overwhelmed, Buklak Khan talks about this in a book. I can't remember the name, where he's saying we're living in a time of information overload, where people just, and I find this myself, where it's just like, wow, and you're doing your data analysis, you're doing your philosophy, Hegel, Nietzsche, trying to write a book, fucking trying to do all this shit, and it just gets so overwhelming. And a friend of mine said, I said this previously, where I was like, it's just too much. And she was like, just write as if you're going to die in 6 months. And there's a sort of pressure valve that I find very, it sort of relieves pressure where I can just say, okay, look, I'll do this work. This work is wild. And I can, if it just gets too much, well, I can just say bye. I've given you my gift. That's me. I've given you my life. And when we were going through Cadell's lecture previous time, I was sort of getting visions of like my dead body. It was surreal. And so I think you're right, Dimitri, and Heidegger was saying this too as well, that we are beings towards death. It's death and our finitude that give us meaning. Do you want to come in here, Gareth, before you go? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I actually come in here to tell you of my coming death right now. I'm going to have to leave here soon. So,
do you have any thoughts? Do you have any thoughts on this point though before you go?
My last thoughts here is
on death.
Go. Fuck. I don't know. I shouldn't speak. I should just leave. I leave now. I told you I should have just died. All right, I will go now.
See you, man. Soon. It's been a pleasure this week, as always. So, yeah, we will talk soon. I think we have our class on Monday as well. Take care, guys. Bye bye.